It's great to see you all. This feels like the largest Thanksgiving dinner. So next time when we have lunch, we'll figure out who the crazy uncle is. Anyway, I am so excited to be here with you all today. And we got a little ahead of ourselves, but that's okay. I wanted to take a show of hands. How many of you all know what Morningstar is? How many think, oh, okay, fantastic. Veggie burgers or financial services? Oh, no. Well, there is a Morningstar Farms, not where I am. I am at Morningstar, and we are the global leader in data research and analytics for the financial services industry. But we're a little bit different insofar as we actually primarily serve individual investors. So if any of you all out in the audience today participate in a 401k plan, have ever purchased a mutual fund, have even thought about any sort of financial security, that sort of thing, chances are Morningstar has touched it, has rated it, given it 5 stars, etc. So that's just a little bit of where I'm coming from. We're the original fintech startup in Chicago. We're about 35 years old. So what I want to start today by is a little bit of quiet. So everybody close your eyes. I'm going to close my eyes too. Take yourself back to the first time you ever heard the word experiment, or the scientific method, or maybe the first time you were in a lab. Okay, you can open your eyes, but keep yourself there throughout this presentation. I remember being about 11 years old in 5th grade. Mrs. Kane was my science teacher, and I thought she knew everything. She had these fancy poster boards and big whiteboards and words like hypothesis, and independent variable, and dependent variable, and observations and data, and drawing conclusions. And as I reflected on that, I thought about, okay, this is actually what we do as product marketers, but we might not be thinking about that sort of framework or that lens. So I asked you today to come on a journey with me and think differently about all of the things we do, whether you're at that seed stage company or you're a $1 billion entity with 6,000 employees, 27 global offices, and publicly traded. So what is the first thing I wanted to do when I was preparing this weekend? I have 2 boys, 5.5 and 4 years old, and I thought, well, if I can get through this presentation and they're convinced, then it would be a breeze with y'all. So where did I start? I said, Jack, he's my 5.5-year-old, what does experiment mean to you? And he's raising his hand, and he's in kindergarten. He said, Mama, 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 I know. It's when you start to think about something in a way that you've never thought about it before. But then you take the potions and you mix the potions together and see what happens on the other end. And I said, oh, this is great. I'm going to write this in my notes. I got it down. And then I turned to my 4-year-old because, of course, he doesn't want to be outdone. He's raising his hand, Mama, 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 I know what it is. It's like when I have this idea in my head of a picture that I want to draw, and then I put it down on paper with my crayons and my markers, and maybe I throw some Play-Doh in there too. And then it's like something brand new that I've never seen before. And so from the eyes of a 5.5 and a 4-year-old, experimentation is the blend of the art and the science of learning something new that you didn't know before. So just think about it. Experimentation is the blend of that art and the science to learn something new that you didn't know before. And where do we start? I have a couple colleagues in the audience, Karen here and Darshita, who used to work for me a couple companies ago. I'm so excited that you all are here. And I always say that empathy is currency. I was really encouraged by some of the other presentations earlier this morning that talked about the importance of not only user research, but also market research. So I am a recovering English major. And I always go back to some of my examples in one of my favorite books, and now a fantastic play, To Kill a Mockingbird. So I think about how do we embrace and embody the insatiable curiosity of Scout with the tenacity and the fortitude of Atticus. And we start first getting to that empathy of really just getting out there, getting curious and talking to people. Now, I've worked for everything from startups to Disney. We'll have some Disney examples in a little moment. And obviously you're saying, especially if you're seed stage or you got fewer than 50 people in the room, I don't have money to go, spend $20,000 to hire some fancy agency or vendor or whatever to go out and do these longitudinal qualitative and quantitative studies. What am I going to do? Honestly, you all, by nature of you being in this room, are most likely extroverted and have insane networks. So if you start thinking about from the beginning, okay, you have this problem or you have this thing that you're trying to solve, you more than likely know 10 to 15 people across your entire life that might have a similar situation going on. And it's much easier to pick up the phone and ask them for 15 or 30 minutes of their time because you already have that relationship with them than trying to go out and hire this firm and spend all this money and this time trying to recruit. Not saying that's a bad situation. And if any of you are from agencies that do that, God bless you, it's good work. But at the same time, use what you have and be a little bit scrappy. So go talk to those 10 to 15 people. This is the genesis of your hypothesis, right? Bringing us back to that scientific method. I want to observe and listen to the market. In my experience, once you get to that sort of 10, 15 people, you hit the point of diminishing returns. You start to hear the same kind of trends over and over again of, I have this problem, I tried to use Excel, it didn't work. If you're in tech, if I had $1 for every time somebody told me they use Excel to do something it wasn't built for. And then you're saying, okay, I've got some really good ideas. I've kind of climbed into their skin and walked around a little bit. But now you really need to get to scale. You need to start doing those surveys. You need to substantiate some of the sort of initial learnings that you got out of those kind of first points of curiosity. Any Family Feud friends, fans in the audience? So what do? They go out and they survey 100 people. Relative statistical significance, and that phrase is really difficult for a 5.5 and 4-year-old to say, but nonetheless, statistical significance, and kind of what the objective is to start narrowing down some of those pieces of your hypothesis. How do you get much more specific about the people whom you're serving, the problems that they have, how they're incentivized, what their goals are, any sort of maybe seasonality in their business, who their clients are, all those types of things. And now, you can go the full scrappy route and use things that are relatively easy to find, like a Google survey or SurveyMonkey or other things, or you can go out to the route of hiring out a firm to do the sort of quantitative research for you. And it doesn't need to be this protracted, oh man, some people hear research and they're like, this is gonna take 6 months, this is gonna take a year. No, you can spin it up in a few weeks and you would be amazed at what people do and tell you about for a $5 Starbucks gift card, right? That cup of coffee, people like coffee and t-shirts. And it's amazing to me. It doesn't matter. I've worked in all sorts of different industries, all different types of companies, serving all different types of markets. And universally, the humanity of coffee and t-shirts works. Okay, so now we really want to embrace, we've gotten curious, we've talked to people, we have the kernels of a hypothesis, but we really want to break that into, and I'll go through these sections in 3 parts, the who and the why. If you don't have that right, and I know many of you have probably seen a lot of this research out there, 85 to 90% of startups fail. Why do they fail? Because they didn't have product market fit. They said there's some cool people in a room who are like, I have this problem. Or maybe there's some great engineers in the room who are like, wouldn't it be awesome if we built this super shiny cool thing? And then they sort of toss it over the fence to us in marketing and they're like, go find a value prop. Go find my market. Let's go sell this thing. Instead of getting product marketers in at the ground level to define the who and the why before anything gets built. That's that first section, and that's why I bolded it, because I'm really on a crusade to drive this research and importance. And then let's take the next 3. The what, the where, the when. Again, thinking about what am I building out for my test plan? Ultimately, my sort of experimentation or your go-to-market plan is wrapped up in these questions. What are we offering? Is it a product? Is it a service? Is it a combination of those things? Where? How are we going to distribute this? How are people actually going to buy it? How are people going to experience it? But then also the when, and especially I think we had about 70 or so-ish percentage of the audience in B2B. There's so much seasonality that goes into how we go to market and how we sell, right? Right around this time, how many of you all are in like budget season right now, putting together strategic planning, all of that? Well, so are our clients in other businesses. And what are they trying to do in Q4? And why does that look like a lot of B2B companies where our revenue is so heavily backloaded at the back of the year? They want to spend their money so they can convince their higher ups that they need the money next year, right? You've gotten to that point in the year. And so ultimately, from a sales perspective and from your market's perspective, there's a lot of seasonality. So you really need to understand when, not just in the time period of the year, but also in the construct of the competitive landscape. What's going on in the market? Is there M&A activity going on? Is there divestitures going on? Is there some other sort of market trend that are driving the timing that will be really, really important? And then the last two questions we could spend 3 days, 3 months, a year on, and I know there are other sessions about pricing as well. This I'm so passionate about. You gotta build packaging and pricing that conveys the value that those people are going to ascertain from using your product and service. Because price tends to be the number one thing in your go-to-market strategy that pegs you to something else. I already told you we're in financial services. We all have so much baggage when it comes to money. Whatever your background was, your perceptions of money, they don't just kind of stop when you walk into the front door, right, of your particular audience. So as you're pricing something, you have to go back to the who and the why. What is their perception of, having 3 different packages in pricing, the good, better, best model that many of us are aware of in SaaS, or just all you can eat model, or usage-based pricing, or all of these different things, that will immediately put into their head, sort of engender in their minds, what value I am going to take out of that product or service. Similarly, from an experimentation standpoint, going back to that scientific method, pricing and packaging are really, really profound levers in how the outcome of your experiment what ultimately the outcome of your experiment will be. Insofar as, again, thinking about the competitive landscape. Are you a new entrant? Are you creating a new category? If you're a new entrant into an established category, are you gonna undercut price to steal share? Right, so there are all of these different levers and variables that you need to be aware of as you're putting together this test plan. And then the last thing, this is a little bit controversial, so just go with me for a moment, but I'd be curious afterwards too how many people think about it in this way. I really think that product marketing should have a quota. And that means incentive structure is so profound insofar as what behaviors that it drives in your particular organization. Just think about it. What's the one thing that would connect you to sales more than anything else? Having the exact same quota, signing up for business goals, actual closed-won business, ACV, bookings, revenue, etc. And so I think a lot of times, and maybe we can take a show of hands too, we're so focused on what that sort of immediate output would be, or if people who have come from the demand gen side or lead gen side, right, you're so focused on how many leads am I driving, or sometimes even kind of what I call vanity metrics within a particular tactic. How many downloads did I get? How many people went to my website? How many likes? How many clicks, etc. All of those are fine metrics directionally, but ultimately we need to be focused on acquisition, revenue, how much money did we close at the end of the day, because that is a true measure of product market fit, how you're positioning, how your distribution channels, how you're packaging and pricing, all of the things that we just went through, that's the ultimate measure of your success. So I'm encouraging you all, I'd love to have more of a discussion here to see what are all those different models. If you've got what I call the quad all aligned to that, so product, marketing, sales, and service, all focused on that same objective, it's really hard to start having conflicts within that, right? You're all on the same team. You're all trying to score the goal. You might have different positions, obviously, across the field, but ultimately we're trying to win the game at the end of the day within the constructs of whatever those rules are. Okay, so let's recap. So we got curious. We talked to people. We created our hypothesis. We got that at scale. We have our sort of testing plan together, all of those crucial fundamental elements. You're like, really? We haven't done anything yet. So let's get to it. Now the fun begins. Now the potions come together. I'm going to mix a little bit of this and a little bit of that and put it together and see what happens. Experimentation and collecting data. So the first kind of deliverable in more practical terms that I focus on with my team is the map. The messaging map, bringing all of those questions, the answers to those questions together in one place, such that you have a really good idea of whom are we targeting, what do they care about, why, what's your independent variable, how are you differentiated in that particular scenario, what are you offering them, when, where are you offering it to them, how much and how, etc. That should all be in one map. If we're all trying to get to the same destination, a map is super helpful. Now, the interesting thing about this map is it serves a foundation. A lot of people are like, really? You want me to put this into a brief? You want me to put it on a piece of paper? But what happens when we start working with a lot of those cross-functional teams and suddenly everybody's asking you for things, I gotta get a Twitter post, I need copy for the website, I have to have this one sheet for whatever, I have a pitch deck over here. If you don't have that one central place where all of your messaging, positioning resides and that can be distributed, relates back to what Martin was talking about with Flutter, right? Like, oh, whoa, there's one central code base and you can deploy it to all of these different places. It's the exact same idea. So then it gets interesting. And I don't know, it'll be interesting to talk with some of you all afterwards as well. We have demand gen in my group too. So we've got product marketing, demand gen, and events marketing all sort of in one umbrella. We still partner and have lots of different cross-functional teams that we're working with. But ultimately, we have full control over the budget and the spend, how we're prioritizing which marketing channels we're going after. And then we also have the accountability to see how we're progressing against that budget, what's our return on investment, et cetera, and so on. So we have a little bit more control of the lab environment, as it were, than maybe some other organizations do here. But that's where, when you're collecting data and you're running this sort of mini experiments within your ultimate much bigger go-to-market strategy experiment, where you start looking at a lot of those directional variables. And those are important. But again, you really need that product marketing team, or maybe there's some other cross-functional lead that is responsible for the ultimate goal. How much business are we winning at the end of the day? And it's not just about those marketing channels. If you're in a B2B environment, it's certainly about sales. And if you have the same objective, I know I'm repeating myself a little bit, but if you have the same objective as your sales team, there's less reticence for them to let you into their calls, to let you listen in, to do ride-alongs, to actually go in on those pitches so you can hear firsthand. When I was at a company called Jive, I was on the road 80% of my time, and that was invaluable to understand and sit with, whether it was an account executive, inside salesperson, what have you, and just understand, one, are they even using any of the content we were putting out, to the earlier point? Are they speaking in the same messages? But to see across every single industry vertical, how do we show up? And so that feedback is so important. Some people call it voice of the customer. That's fine. It's just another channel that you should be collecting data and bringing that back in. And then something happens, right? We all get to launch day. We got our go-to-market strategy. We know who we're targeting. We got our messaging. We have our product. We got our pricing. We got packaging, all of it. And lightning hits the clock tower, and all of a sudden, you go to the place where roads are not needed anymore. But in the process of that launch, you generally leave a wake of fire all behind it. I think that's job security. Some people may disagree. But it really is earning all those little fires that cropped up along the way, or things that you didn't anticipate. It's very similar to art, I think, going back to that art and science in the blend. When Picasso or Van Gogh or U2, who we listened to before, when they're creating something in their basement, in their home, in their studio, whatever, it's just exists in their minds. But when you put it out into the market, then it takes on a whole other life of its own. And it gives you the opportunity to develop those sequels. Right? So think about that. Okay, now if I'm in this spirit and this mindset of scientific experimentation and exploration, I'm giving myself the opportunity to go and test, learn, and iterate and take all of that data, drawing different conclusions, and rerun the experiment. I'm going to change this variable this time. I'm going to see what happens. Now, that's not to say you have to be working in an organization. I was talking to Shannon about this before, where you have some little test where you've proven out the model. So you have a little bit more leeway to continue on your world of experimentation. A lot of organizations, Morningstar included, very data-driven. So isolate, okay, is there a particular market segment, product, maybe that's a little bit less risky, a little bit smaller, that allows you to sort of prove the model, have that first experiment, and then ultimately scale to these sequels. Take the observations that you had and the data about that particular market. What are other lookalike markets, different segments, different geographies, et cetera, where it can really scale this type of behavior in these plans? And that's not to say, I had another conversation with Martin out in the hallway. You know, a lot of people, we have these great research organizations. When I worked at Disney, we had a whole army of PhDs looking at market research all the time. And sometimes that data would just exist in a really pretty deck, and people would go to the presentation, you sit in the meeting and say, wow, that's really fascinating. And then people would just go on their merry way and do their thing, get back to their daily jobs. So I really highly encourage you to take those pieces into action and do something about it. That's where the value comes in. And I'll lead you all, when you work at Disney, it's really hard to get the Disney out of you. So I tend to have a lot of kind of Disney examples from many years ago, but it was a great part of my career. And one of my favorite anecdotes is about the opening day of Disneyland. I don't know if any, being in California, hopefully you all have visited, and if you know this anecdote, just hang with me. Disneyland opened July of 1955. And as you may know, Walt Disney, coming off of the high of Snow White, huge box office success, really fueled the revenues from that movie fueled a lot of the innovation of the company. And he said, you know what, I have this idea. Instead of just taking my daughters to this carousel in a park in LA, I'm gonna go build this fully immersive storytelling experience called Disneyland. And he went on these insane PR sprees, trying to raise money, sponsorships. He had a whole dedicated show for it. And so, he's gearing up for the launch, right? He has, on the first day, opening day of Disneyland, the premise was kind of like what we would see as embargoed press engagement, right? He said, okay, well, I'm gonna invite a couple hundred international press people to come see and then tell the world about the greatest place on earth. What he didn't realize was that some of those international press people actually passed out some tickets to their friends, and over 20,000 counterfeit tickets were printed. Hold that in your head for a second. So, and this may sound a little bit familiar, you're sitting, in that go, no, go meeting right before the launch. Walt's walking through Disneyland Park, talking to some Imagineers. And Imagineers say, Walt, we have some bad news. We actually weren't able to get cement into all of the areas of the park such that there are sidewalks everywhere for everybody to walk on. And he said, oh, no worries, I can direct the press people where they need to go. We just avoid those areas, what have you, so on and so forth. Well, remember how I said there were 20,000 counterfeit tickets that were printed? Yeah, so in 1955, most people were a little fancier than we are today. Most women wore heels, even to an amusement park. Most men had on very nice shoes, and children were sort of dressed appropriately to go to these amusement parks. So Southern California in July with wet cement and women in heels and 20,000 people you weren't anticipating means your MVP launch is people sinking into the cement and losing their shoes in front of hundreds of international press people. Let that sink in for a moment. So we could have done a couple things here, right? He could have said, oh man, throw in the towel, we're gonna get all of this terrible press, et cetera. But he said, you know what, no. We are going to take this as a learning, and in Disney parlance, it's all about the guest. Whatever that feedback is from our guests, we're gonna go out and find them shoes. So all backstage, basically they went and found shoes and brought them to these people whose shoes were either literally in the cement or broken or non-functioning, so that they could still experience Disneyland. And then they strategically sort of marked off places where the cement wasn't quite dry. It could have been the end of one of the most iconic brands as we know it. But because he thought differently, he took feedback, he acted very quickly on the data and the feedback and came up with a more interesting solution, people still had a fantastic time. And now Disney Parks is a nearly, I think, $15 billion entity at this point. I would imagine nearly everyone in the room has experienced Disney Parks in some way, shape, or form. And so what I want to leave you here today is that Disneyland, or any products or services or things that we're creating, will never be completed as long as there's imagination left in the world. So I highly encourage you to embrace the spirit of the scientific method of experimentation and the notion that Disney also proffered that it's kind of fun to do the impossible. Thank you.
Thank you,